today, and also for the suggestion that I include in my presentation of my father and his work, that I also include something about your great grandfather, and because your great grandfather was Isidor Kaufmann, a wonderful painter, and that really set me off on a whole train of thought that I had never imagined doing, and I hope you'll be pleased. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to take it away. Okay. So they call me Meyer July. You may wonder why I have called this presentation They Call Me Meyer July, but you'll discover that in just a moment. And what I'd like to do is to actually begin with just a second here. I want to begin, let's see. Yes, I want to begin with Sue's great grandfather. I want to start with Isidor Kaufmann, and I want to talk about him in a way that will provide a kind of point of contrast with what I want to say about my father. So let me begin with Kaufmann. So Isidor Kaufmann was born 1853 and he died in 1921. My father was born in 1916. So clearly, Isidor Kaufmann is really living in the second half of the 19th century and the first decades of the 20th. And so it's a very, very interesting period. And he wasn't born in Vienna. He was born actually in an area that is today Romania, but he lived in Vienna and he attended the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. So he was an academically trained artist. And my father, as you'll discover, was a self-taught artist, an outsider artist, a folk artist, however, whatever terminology you would like to use. And my father only began painting when he was 73 years old. So that, and my father, of course, was born and raised in Poland. So they're slightly, I mean, they're all Eastern Europe, but different places, different periods, though there is some overlap. Now, the biggest difference is that Kaufman, um, he spent his summers traveling around Galicia. I'm going to show you a map of Galicia in a moment so you'll understand geographically where we are. And he spent months at a time in Galicia seeking out Jewish communities in small towns. And when he would write letters back to his wife, and he would talk about how absolutely thrilling it was to visit these wooden synagogues and their painted interiors, and to visit was a largely because Galicia was the heartland of Hasidism. He called Galicia his promised land. He was just crazy about it, and he produced the work he produced is really evidence of it. Now, basically, the most important point here is that he was visiting, it was like the Dark Continent. It was like making an ethnographic expedition into the Wild East. He was going to a place that was as different from Vienna as could be imagined. This was not the world in which he was living in Vienna, because he was obviously an artist, an intellectual, Academy of Fine Arts, and he was going off into the countryside, into these little towns, and into these Hasidic strongholds, and it was really, I would say, exotic for him. So there was a kind of distance between him and his subjects, and there was a fascination that he had. And in many ways, it was true of other writers too. And that is to say that they were, you could say, quite modern and acculturated, and they were fascinated by what they thought of as some kind of authentic Jewishness that had been preserved in a kind of backwater, because Galicia in many ways was economically underdeveloped and was a kind of a backwater. And in this so-called backwater was preserved traditional Jewish ways of life that absolutely intrigued these painters and writers and playwrights and other artists, and also people making music. Now, what would he do? He would make studies on the spot. So he was actually making studies of what he could see live at the moment, in real time and in the place. My father was, on the other hand, remembering what he had lived, not something exotic that really was another world other than his world. On the basis of these drawings, he'd come back to Vienna in the winter. He would make paintings. in his studio. And he made numerous studies on site, and these became very detailed, refined paintings and in Vienna. And portraiture was his great forte. So first of all, what is Galicia and where is it? And this is a map of the Austrian Empire, or the Austro-Hungarian Empire, before World War I. And this is Galicia up here, right up here. This is Galicia. Now, what is Galicia? Galicia is a province of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It is a province of the empire, and it is the part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It is the partition of the big Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth that Austria took between 1772 and 1795. So it used to belong to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and it then became a part of the Austrian Empire, and they created a separate province, and they called it Galicia. So to give you a better sense of it, you can see that during this period, Krakow was in Galicia. And then you can also see some, rather famous places where, for example, Drohobych, which is where Bruno Schulz was from. And you'll be able to see on this map, you'll be able to see, this is today, Nowy Sącz is today in Poland. Here is Lvov. So you get a sense of, this is the territory that he liked to hang out in. Now, he was absolutely fascinated by Hasidism and by Hasidic rabbis or Hasidic leaders, and portraiture was his forte. So you get a sense, and these are definitely, he was, I can't believe that he painted other than from live models. And of course, he had these wonderful, I would say, Torah arc curtains and mantles, and he used all of these elements as props for his paintings. He also painted scenes, and I've selected a few because I find there are parallels between some of the scenes that he painted and some of the scenes that Meyer painted, but you'll see that in just a moment. And you can see that these are very, very idealized. They're also meticulously painted, extremely detailed. A Sabbath scene. And this is fascinating because by the time my father was, I would say maybe 10 or 12 years old, so he would have really vivid memories of his childhood. This sort of clothing would not have, we wouldn't have been able to see it. In fact, the second half of the 19th century, this is a Brusttuch. This is very, very traditional piece of women's clothing. You just wouldn't see it. It was considered already archaic by the middle of the 19th century. So he was obviously seeking out the archaic, the Hasidic, what from an urban Viennese point of view would have been exotic, but at the same time felt to be deeply and authentically and essentially Jewish to highly urbanized, highly acculturated Viennese Jews. So obviously the synagogue was another one of his favorite subjects. And what I find fascinating, just incredibly interesting, are two paintings that he made of the interiors of wooden synagogues in Galicia, one in Jabłonów and the other one in Gwoździec. So this is not his drawing, but I just want to show you the exterior of this wooden synagogue, and this is probably from this probably appeared in the illustrated press, in the Polish illustrated press in the 1880s. This is the exterior of the synagogue for which he painted the interior. Now, what is so fabulous is that in this period, there are no color photographs. And to the degree that we know what these interiors looked like of these incredible wooden synagogues, we, in terms of color, we only know them actually from, I think, two sources, two paintings that Kaufmann made and one color study that was made by Alois Breyer, also a Viennese, in his case, an architectural historian. So this is, now clearly, this would have been, I would imagine this would have been a painting where he would have made a sketch. He would have definitely made a preparatory sketch of the painted interior, but I can't believe he didn't work from a live model once he got back to Vienna. But when we say that he visited these small towns in Galicia, look at where he was. So Jabłonów, 1880, there were 924 Jews. They built this synagogue. you have less than 1,000 Jews, and they can build and they can maintain this synagogue. And when this synagogue was built, which is probably the 17th century, there were even fewer Jews in the town. So you didn't have, these are small communities, but they were able to build these incredible synagogues with these incredible painted interiors. And so Jews are 57% of the population in 1880. He would have been here in the 1890s, late 1890s. So by, let's say, by 1900, there were 1,000 Jews in the town, and they were 60% of the population. So this is really the characteristic Jewish towns, and these small towns with these very small Jewish communities were able to create these incredible synagogues. Here's the next one. This is from Gvozdets in Ukraine. It's the same story. It's a speck bigger than Yablonov. It's that this tiny town with this small Jewish population builds the synagogue, and he paints the interior. He calls this painting the Rabbi's Portal. This is the interior of the synagogue in Gvozdets. So there were 1,263 Jews in 1880 out of 1,887 population. That means that it was almost two-thirds of the population. And similarly, in 1900, Jews were over 50% of the population. And of course, these are towns with a very strong Hasidic presence. Now, why is this so special for me? It's so special for me because at Polin Museum, as you know, from those of you who were able to attend my lecture last time, we reconstructed the painted ceiling and the timber framed roof of this synagogue, of the synagogue in Gvozdets. And we used this painting for color references to create this incredible interior. So this is what he was so crazy about. This was his promised land. This is where he spent months in the summer making sketches, came back to Vienna, and then he made these fabulous, fabulous paintings. So now let me turn to Meyer. So Meyer is born in 1916, and in a Patuf, I'll show you where that is in just a moment. And he paints from memory. And he's 73, and he's born in 1916. So it's more than 60 years earlier. He's remembering from 60 years ago his own life, which is not exotic to him. In other words, he is painting what he knows, having lived it firsthand. And as he is remembering it in a conversation, in a 40-year conversation with me, first in words and then in images. So the whole situation is different, even though there are many very, for me, surprising affinities, because I just never thought about it until Sue had asked if I would include Isidor Kaufmann when talking about Meyer. So I began interviewing my father in 1967. Is this the way to talk to a parent? Well, if interviewing is listening with love, I had been listening with love for almost 4 decades. I began in 67, and I was listening with love to my father until he died in 2009. And that is a very long and the most gratifying, incredible conversation. It became the single, it was, how can I say, what else was there to talk about? And we could sustain this conversation for hours on end. And of course, I recorded everything. Being trained as a folklorist, anthropologist, ethnographer, any conversation worth having should be recorded. And that's exactly what I did. Now, when we talked, my father would explain what he meant by drawing in my notebook. So for example, he wanted to describe to me how you put out a fire in a Patuf, in his hometown. I have no intention of ever putting out a fire, certainly not in a town. And the way they did it was they had a little pump on wheels, and they would wheel this pump all the way down to the river, fill it up with water, haul it up to the town, and try and put out a fire. You can imagine how hopeless that was. But he wanted to explain to me the mechanism, and I didn't understand it. So he made me a drawing. And he did that for innumerable things. So here's how he introduced himself. And I should say that it was only, I would say, after he was 73 years old. So it would have been in around 1990, let me think for a second. So he died in 09. So it would have been in the late 80s that he began to paint. He painted for 20 years. For the last 20 years of his life, he painted. So all the way through the 1990s and then in 2000 up to 2009. So what happened was that he got sick when he was 59 years old, and we were worried. He was worried that it was quite serious. He was worried that if he got sick again, that my mother would be stuck with the business. So he proceeded to sell the business and retire. And then he got well. And now he was at 59, 60 years old, and he was well, vigorous, and he was at loose ends. So for about 10 years, my mother, my husband, who's an artist, myself, we begged and he pleaded with him to paint what he could remember, and he refused. And we gave him brushes and canvas and, Conti crayons and paper and an easel, everything imaginable, and he refused. And one day my mother came home from the JCC, and she said to him, Meyer, I signed you up for art classes at the JCC, and they don't give refunds. So he had no option but to go to the life drawing class, to the still life class. He lasted 1 or 2 sessions, and that was it. He just, it was hopeless. So we said to him, look, just try. Well, to our total and utter delight, amazement and delight, he did try. And for his 50th wedding anniversary, my sister Elaine and I actually made a celebration for my parents at her home, and she and I cooked. We catered the whole thing ourselves. And my father arrived with the easel and with his first painting. So he was very, very resistant and very reluctant, and he finally yielded, and he began painting. And so from that moment on, from the age of 73 to 93, the last 20 years of his life, he painted what he could remember about growing up in Poland before the Holocaust. So here's his self-portrait, and I just want to give you a feel for the project, because he was a wonderful storyteller, and he had the most extraordinary memory. He was never what I would call introspective. I remember when we got the Canadian Jewish Book Award, we had to make a speech, and I said to him, "Listen, they're going to give you the award, and when we get up there, you're going to have to say something." He says, "Well, what should I say?" I said, "Well, why don't you tell them how you feel about getting the award?" He said, "How I feel?" The idea that he would talk about how he felt, that he would be, psychologically, my mother was very psychological, and we think of her as a kind of psychological genius, without any training, but that she was so intuitive. No way. But if you asked him how to make a shoe, he could describe it to you in minute detail. So he was not introspective. I call him extrospective, because he, in a sense, knew himself through the way in which he engaged the world with the most extraordinary curiosity about everything, about people, and about how things worked. And I think it was his curiosity and this extrospective temperament that contributed to his exceptional memory. So that's the first thing. The second is he was a great storyteller, and he first of all, for 30 or 25 years was basically telling me these stories in our interviews. But then he started to tell these stories visually, and the visual storytelling and the way he told these stories in words came together in the most wonderful way. So here he is. I was named after my great-grandfather, Meyer Machel Guttmacher. Everybody in town had a nickname. So there was like the big Meyer, the little the big Meyer, the little Meyer. There was Meyer, the goose carcass. Don't ask me why. And he said his name was Meyer Thomas, Meyer July, because July was the hottest month of the year, and Meyer Thomas means crazy Meyer. People get excited when it is hot, and I was an excitable kid. So that's where Meyer July comes from. Now, so in 1990s, when he started painting, when he was 73, he goes through this uniform from the hat to the boots, explaining every single element: the hat, the Slovatsky collar, the blue uniform jacket, the +4s, the 2 pairs of socks, the red ski boots, the brass eyelets, and the yellow shoelaces. But each of them is a story in itself. And then, of course, there's the story of the herring. He calls it Boy with a Herring. It's actually a self-portrait. It's one of the first paintings that he made. And he's carrying it using a little piece of newspaper, explaining that newspaper was so expensive and so precious that they wouldn't wrap a herring in a newspaper. They would take a small piece of newspaper as a handhold and he would carry it, and it would drip. The salt that it was marinated in, the brine would drip, and he would lick the brine on the way home. But then he explains how to make a katzborscht, a scratch borscht, so that from one herring you could make a meal for a whole family. That you would buy a male herring, you would open it up, you would open up the milts, the sperm sac, you would scrape out the sperm. With the sperm, you would take a little bit of vinegar, a little bit of sugar, and you would mix it up, and that would be the sauce. You would cut the herring into pieces, cut the bread into pieces. You would dip the bread in the sauce, and you would take a piece of herring, and that would be a meal. So there's one painting that has in it a story about his father sending him the socks from Canada, about the ski boots. It's just, and I think that's a key to his memory, because by literally going from his hat to his shoes, he can then open up. It's like a Pandora's box of memories. So this is really, I think, very, very extraordinary. This is very different from Kaufmann going off into his promised land, hanging out in these incredible wooden synagogues and their painted interiors, and then spending Sabbath in the home of a Hasidic rabbi or a Hasidic Rebbe, a Hasidic a tzaddik, and then making sketches and coming back to Vienna in his studio, and setting up a whole scene with a fancy cloth and outfitting a model, and then painting from life. These are like worlds apart, but they're also worlds that are related to one another. Okay, so where are we? This is a map of Myers, Poland, the Second Polish Republic, so 1914 to 1918. And you can see that in this map, Vilna is in Poland. And what happens after the war, I'll show you in a moment, is that this whole part goes to Ukraine, Belarus, and Lithuania. Poland loses this whole part. And this part from Germany gets given to Poland. So in a sense, Poland moves west, and people who were living in this area are relocated back to Poland, and they settle in the newly so-called recovered territories from Germany. So this is Myers, Poland. This is where my mother is from, Brześć nad Bugiem, and Meyer is from this area here. You see Kielce, Sandomierz, Opatów would be right here. There's Lublin, there is Warsaw, Lodz. So this gives you a feel for where Meyer's from, and Galicia would be, let me just see, so there's Krakow, so Galicia would have been down here, and Stanisław, exactly, and Lvov. This would have been Galicia, this area here, just to give you an orientation. And this is today's Poland, the Third People's Republic. And in this map, because everything is moved to the west, Opatów is right over there, Staszów, Sandomierz, Opatów, there it is, right there. And so now it is in what's called South Central Poland. Actually, it's even a little bit to the east. So that's where Myers town is. Okay, so I'm going to give you kind of a quick tour of what Meyer remembers and how he remembers it in words and images. So Opatów is near Kielce, which was the provincial seat, and actually compared with the towns that I showed you that Kaufmann painted with Yarosław and Gwoździec, it's kind of a big town. It's 10,000 people with 6,500 Jews and 3,500 Christians. So similar to those other towns, it is that, it's more than 2/3 of the town is Jewish. And when you have that kind of concentration of Jews in a location, the town has a very particular character. So Meyer made me a panorama of the town, and it's very much like these panoramas that we know even from the late Middle Ages and the early modern period, where it's not a skyline, but rather all the important buildings are in a sense lined up. And so that you get the panorama more as a conceptual panorama than as a skyline that you would see if you were standing, let's say, standing there. So you've got the remnants of the old city wall, the old city gate, the town well, a World War I monument, the synagogue, there's a monastery, there's the church, and there are the important buildings in the town. Now, you'd think a little town would be a very quiet, sleepy place, but even these little towns, for a kid and for a curious kid like Meyer, they were really absolutely fascinating. So there were street performers. There was an organ grinder with his parrot, and what you'll see in all, I think, virtually every painting, a little boy in blue, and that's Meyer as a kind of child witness to his own life. And he's like, I think of him as he's Opatov's Where's Waldo, because you're going to find him if you look in any painting, you're going to invariably find him. Now, and of course it was a market town, and this is very characteristic. The towns where Jews were to be found were market towns. They were based on Germantown law, which meant they had a marketplace and they had ordered regular streets on all four sides of the marketplace, and they really were the economic hub of the region. And the market days were very, very important. So when it wasn't a market day, this was an enormous marketplace and it was relatively empty. But on market day, it was chock-a-block full because of all the peasants came in with their wagons, their livestock, their produce. And the Jews, of course, set up their booths and opened their shops. And of course, there's a town prostitute. This is a very uncensored perspective on what it was like to grow up in Poland before the war in such a town. And I should add that, and Meyer loved the market day because you had thieves, they were playing tricks, three-card Monte, they would play tricks on peasant women and make off with their eggs. They were really, it was, well, I think most of us, I think many of us love markets anyway, but you can imagine for a kid, market day was like the circus. And of course, other street performers, he remembers, and there he is, of course. Just 1 second, he's right here. There's Meyer. What he called the human fly. This was a guy that would climb up the corner of the town hall, and apparently he had some kind of a rod or something where he would climb up and hang from it, but they called him the human fly, and this was something that Meyer loved. Also, notice the wood graining. Meyer was a house painter before he had his own wallpaper and paint store, and he wanted to improve his skills, so he went to night school to learn how to fake wood. And he could fake teak, mahogany, walnut, cherry, maple, you name it. And he used all of his skills as a house painter in his paintings. And it's kind of like a madhouse of wood graining. You'll see it on furniture, on doors. You'll see it on many of the paintings. Now, when he would describe things to me, he would say, this was at the top of such and such a street, at the corner of that street, on this street. I said to him, listen, I have no idea where I am. I'm completely confused. So I made him a list of all the places he mentioned to me. He meant a hospital, the stepping stones to the meadows, the lake, the carp ponds, Hamala's grocery, the watermill, the shul, the interim best medrash. I said, I don't know where these places are. Make me a map. So he did. So here's the map that he made me of his town, and and he put these places on the town on this actual map. And sometimes now people going to Apatov take this map with them to see if they can locate the places where their families either had a home or a store. Now, these towns had two centers of gravity: the marketplace and the synagogue. And obviously the marketplace and everything commercial around it. And that's where Jews and non-Jews mixed, and both, not only for economic reasons, that's where also there were public festivities, also on Saturday, promenading. So it was a very public space. The synagogue was, if you will, at the center of, at the heart of Jewish communal buildings. So it would be near the more than one best medrash. It would be near the mikveh. It would be in relation to all the things that are essential to the functioning of a Jewish community, and of course the cemetery. So this is one of Meyer's first paintings. Actually, it was in the first year he started painting, 1990. And it is the exterior of the synagogue, showing the women's section with these barred windows. You're going to see them again, stained glass windows, masonry synagogue, said to be about 500 years old. And of course, the fence, the women up the stairs to the women's section. And I love this painting. I mean, there were cobblestones obviously everywhere, but he didn't put them all in. And these figures are so beautifully painted. And this is 1990. It's one of his very, very first ones. But then the interior. And this interior one, I think he did it in 91. It's just incredible. So where's Meyer? Well, Meyer actually, this time he's here. So this is a Masonry synagogue, and it's very typical of Polish synagogues. In fact, of East European synagogues, because it has a central bema, and the bema is actually structurally part of the vaulting and part of what holds the whole that holds the ceiling up, or the roof. Well, the ceiling really would be the right way to say it. So this is the platform for the reader's desk for the public reading of the Torah, and this, of course, is the Torah ark. And then here, remember, this is the women's section. Now you can see it from the inside with the barred windows, and of course the stained glass windows that you saw from the exterior. And he's got the 12 tribes, the zodiac signs, the spies and the grapes, the Western Wall, Rachel's tomb, lions, the tablets of the law, and the choir, because this would have been, let's say, for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but especially for Rosh Hashanah, the town's cantor would go around looking for boys to form a boys' choir for the high holidays. And my father would have been in the choir. So this just, and the pranks and the tricks, he was such a naughty boy. The pranks and the tricks they played are a big part of what he could remember and what he told me. Now, he didn't confine himself to what he remembered directly. He also went to the Yizkor book, to the memorial book for his town, and he found there stories, whether they're true or legends, but there were stories. And he was very, I would say, his imagination was very captured by them. And so he painted how he visualized the stories that were in the Yizkor book. So in this case, there was a man in the town who became very modern. He wore a top hat, he shaved his beard, he didn't go to shul, he didn't go to synagogue, maybe on Yom Kippur. Then he got very sick, and he was sick for 3 months before he died. And during the period that he was sick, his beard grew back. And when he died, the rabbis tried to figure out what they should do. Should he appear before the Lord as he had lived, clean shaven, or should he appear before the Lord with the beard that he grew while he was sick? And they decided that he should be shaved. He should appear clean shaven. So they brought his corpse to the courtyard of the synagogue, and they shaved the corpse. And this is the painting that my father did of shaving the corpse. So, clearly he had a very visual imagination. It wasn't just that he remembered in a visual way, it was that he visualized even a story that was told. And similarly, this is also for this time of the year. Oh my God, this is so appropriate. In the 1890s, in the Yizkor book, they told a story that the 1890s there had been a plague in the town, an epidemic, probably cholera. And that one of the ways they try to get rid of the cholera, one of the ways they try to stop the epidemic, was to hold a wedding in the cemetery. It was called a schwarze chasana, or a schwarze chuppah, a black wedding or a black chuppah. In fact, the chuppah, if I would have known, I would have said to him, this chuppah should be black. But nonetheless, the whole town, all the Jews come. The klezmorim are there. There's a little black cast iron pot where they put money for this young couple. They have schnapps. And the mitzvah is to take two people who are completely unmarriageable. They're poor. She works as a maid. She might be disabled. He might be mentally challenged. Their prospects are hopeless. There's no dowry. To take two totally unmarriageable people and marry them in the cemetery with a real proper wedding, and give them enough money to get started in their lives, and beseech the dead to intervene on behalf of the living. And it is said that the epidemic actually abated, and then people went back to normal. And then you can notice also that the tombstones were painted, and the letters inside them and some of the decorations were actually gilded in gold. So all those tombstones that we see today that are just the stone, you should know that there was at least in many parts of Eastern Europe and Poland, that they were actually painted in very bright colors and gilded. Now, of course, among the very first paintings my father made were the paintings of his home, which was a 2-room home for 4 boys, his mother, father, and also they had a maid who worked with them. But their first home was one room, and this painting here is a gold mine. You know, this is his mother giving birth to his younger brother Willie, and that's Nola's father, Vadja or Ovadja. And the key on the table, this is Meyer's father Avner, and the key on the table was to be put under the small of Meyer's mother's back so that it would open the womb and the baby would come out more easily. And I see this is probably actually this can't be because there's a baby here and Meyer is here. There's two babies. This has to be Harry. It can't be. I think I would have to ask my father what the hell's going on here, because there's something happening here. I never noticed that there are two babies. So this is obviously the third child. In any event, these are amulets that Lilith, Adam's first wife, shouldn't kill the baby, steal the baby away and kill the baby. The Reshinke, which is a special cake that was made for a bris, or rather for celebrating the birth, and it had mazel tov in dough on it, and you would serve the guests the outside, and you give the mazel tov piece to the woman in labor, and you know it's just like full of stories, the Cheder boys, etc. This is Meyer's very first painting, the kitchen in his two-room house, and look at the wood graining. You know, every surface is wood graining, even here. I'm surprised he didn't grain the door. And of course, he learned the violin, and there's many stories that he tells that are connected to the kitchen in his very first home. This is another, this painting really reminds me of the encyclopedia, the great 18th century encyclopedia of Diderot. In that encyclopedia, Diderot would present kind of a mise en scène of, let's say, a shoe workshop, a printer's workshop, a blacksmith's workshop, and then he would present a set of drawings that took you step by step through the process. And Meyer did the same thing. So this is a shoemaker's home and workshop all in one. The workshop and the home were all in one. Here are all the tools of the trade. And then I have a whole separate set of drawings, which are how to make a shoe. What the story here was that this man had 7 daughters, and every time a baby boy was born, the baby died. And he complained to the rabbi, what am I going to do? I've got 7 daughters. I've got to come up with 7 dowries. How am I going to do that? And I'm not going to have a boy that can say the Kaddish, that can say the prayer for the dead when I'm gone. So the rabbi said to him, take this blessed coin, this amulet, put it on the baby, and wrap the baby in white, and dress the boy in white. And when the angel of death comes to get him, the angel of death thinks he's already dead, so he'll pass over him. So sure enough, the boy survived. And when my father left, the boy was 14, and he was still dressed in white. And then after the war, my father learned from a survivor that during the Great Deportation of all the Jews from Apatov, all but 500 to Treblinka, 500 were on a forced march to Sandomierz to forced labor, that he was taken to Treblinka, still dressed in white, and of course he perished there. So he calls this the boy in the white pajamas, but this is a painting that also has in it a multitude of stories. And there are obviously many more. So now just very quickly to school. So Meyer actually went to 3 different cheters, and basically none of them were to his liking. So the most traditional one, the Melamed, the teacher, had the cheder in his own home. So you can see here, he's got his bed, he's got his stove, and everything is in one room. The cheder and the living situation is all in one room. And the kids sit around the table, and it would be this would be on a hot summer's day. Of course, there's very little light coming in. The candle is burning, and the kids would be droning on, and the Melamed would fall asleep. He had been spreading his beard out on the table, nodding, and he'd fall asleep. And when he was asleep, the kids would take the candle and dribble the hot wax on his beard, and then they'd stop droning, and he would wake up with a start and leave, as my father said, half his beard on the table, which for a religious Jew was absolutely devastating. But these boys, they were so naughty, and my father was first in line. He went to a so-called modern cheder, and you can see here that there are benches, blackboard, but this one was also awful, and he was so naughty that they would lock him up in the cheder overnight. So as a result, he would go around the town wearing a rope wound around his waist. So if he was locked up, the teacher thought he was starving, and meanwhile, the other boys would run to his mother and tell him, Meyer's locked up in the cheder. She would come with a basket of food. He would lower down the rope from his waist, pull up the food, and he would be set for the morning when the cheder opened again. Now, Meyer did a wonderful series of paintings about the holidays. I mean, really, one of the things we did was we literally went through every holiday in the calendar year, every life cycle ritual, every place in town. And we tried, systematically, because once we really got on a roll with this project to remember everything, the town was his memory palace. And by walking through the town, he could remember everything. If he just visualized in his mind's eye each side of the marketplace, each shop, each apartment, that was how he remembered. So the holidays was a case in point. And this reminds me a little bit of the some of the Kaufmann paintings that show Sabbath in the interior, but of course in a very different way, because his mother is not wearing a brusttuch, that very traditional garment. She's not. She has a lace on her hair, but not that very elaborate hair covering. And this is in the second room of the house. You see the wood graining? It's just a kind of a frenzy of wood graining. And these walls are not wallpaper, they're stenciled. It was cheaper to stencil the wall than it was to paper it. And if there was going to be wallpaper, it would have been a little panel behind this clock. And so if you're going to have a more formal Sabbath meal, then you had it in what would have been the master bedroom, which is also where they had the cradle, and Meyer slept in the kitchen. And of course, Purim, one of my very favorite paintings. And this shows a folk drama, a Purim spiel, of showing a Krakow wedding. The Jews, all boys or young men, dressed up in what they thought of as the regional costume of the Krakow area. The men are dressed up as women, wearing the shako hats as they thought, from the Napoleonic era, to make them look more impressive, more something to fear, the klezmorim. And there's a whole story about this wonderful couple and this young boy that they couldn't have kids, so they took him in. There was no such thing as adoption. He was still in touch with his family, but they raised him. And the kids would put a little bit of soot or charcoal on their faces and would follow the Purim players. They were laborers, basically, all around the town, and then look in the window and watch them. And they had a few different plays, but the favorite one was Krakowska Wesela, the Krakow wedding. And so I want to conclude by how Meyer left and what happened when he returned, because I think it's a very, very interesting story. So Meyer's father, Avner, left in 1928. And he left for economic reasons, because he went bankrupt. He had a little shop where he sold leather and findings for shoemakers. And he had a shipment of leather that got stolen, and he couldn't pay back a loan. So he left, but he left on his younger brother's papers, because he had to leave in a hurry. And his younger brother did not want to leave and had actual papers that would allow him to leave. So he actually left as somebody else. And it was only in 1934, 6 years later, that he sent for the family. And here you can see them either selling or giving away all of their belongings. And then the farewell, as they get in the wagon and they take off for Ostrowiec or Ostrovce, where that was the nearest train station that would then take them, and they ended up in Hamburg and then on a ship, and that actually brought them to Halifax, and then all the way to, and you can see this is 1934, so Hitler has already come to power. And in Hamburg, this is what he remembers. Oh, and you see the wood graining again. Oh my God, it's everywhere. And so he wanted to go out of the ship compound and wander around the town. He had to get permission. So this is what he recalls about that office. And then on the ship itself, with one of the shipmates actually trying to push away the ice floes as they approach Newfoundland and then as they approach Halifax. Now, Meyer left in 34, but right after the war, when the war ended, his father, Avner, received letters about what happened to Avner's family. That means to his parents, well, his mother, his father had died before the war, but to his mother, to his father's brothers and their wives and their children. And he found out. And then right after the war, shortly after the war, when some of the survivors returned, they also reported to him what had happened to his mother's family and also to his father's family. And the story is that his father's family was from Ilja or from Drilge, and they were in the ghetto. And during the warm months, spring, summer, early fall, some of the boys in the family snuck out of the ghetto and were in the forest hiding with the partisans. But during the winter, when there was snow, they couldn't stay out in the forest, so they snuck back into the ghetto. And somebody snitched on them, and the Germans proceeded to gather the entire family up, tie Meyer's grandmother Meyer's grandmother to a tree, and all her sons, daughters, their spouses, and their children lined them up and shot them, and then shot her. And so Avner, when Avner got the news of what had happened to his family, he began to shake, and he never stopped shaking for the rest of his life. So finally, when I took my parents to visit his hometown in the 1980s and then in the 1990s, a young man in the town took a great interest in him and stayed in touch with him and arranged for him to show his paintings in the town. So we came back in the 2000s, and there was an exhibition of Meyer's work in the town. So just to show you, this is the marketplace he remembers. This is what it was like at the time. This is what it looks like today. This is the town hall as it looks like today. This is the remnant of the old medieval gate. This is how it looks today. This is the synagogue. This is what's left of it. It was dismantled after the war and the materials used for building. This is how he remembers the cemetery. This is what it looks like today. And this is the exhibition of his work, which was so incredibly beautifully received. And right after it, which is for me the most moving thing of all, and that is that the high school teacher had a competition where she asked the students to go around the town and to paint or take photographs or draw what they saw in relation to what Meyer remembered. So there's a whole series of his paintings and what they could see in the town that they recorded. But most incredible was that on October 22nd, 21st, 22nd, the town, for the very, this case, I think it was October, they did it actually on October 19th, but the actual dates I think are 20th and 21st, or 21st, 22nd. They, for the first time, this was 2008, for the very, very first time in this town's history, they commemorated the liquidation of the ghetto and the deportation of 6,000 Jews to Treblinka and the forced march of 500 of them to Sandomierz for the very first time. And they put these posters up, and you can see they included Meyer's painting, a wartime photograph, and they held a special mass in the church, and high school students read testimonies of witnesses to the Great Deportation. And ever since, the town has been using digital prints of Meyer's photographs in their educational programs, not only for their own students, but also in these European-wide Erasmus programs that bring students from around Europe to Poland. And this was the time when these students actually came to Opatów, and this is what they used. So Sue asked me, "Is there a Landsmann? Do I belong to a Landsmannschaft?" And I said, "Oh, yes, I do." This is the Toronto Landsmannschaft for my father's town of Opatów, and if you can imagine, there's at least 5 generations here, and that includes survivors, that is, people born in the town, their children, their grandchildren, and their great-grandchildren. And so we published a book, and we've made a film, And you can find everything about our project at www.meyerjuly.com. And I'll stop sharing my screen. I think we have probably a few minutes for questions, but I should also say that this is April 19th, and I think it's a very appropriate day in many ways for this presentation because we are commemorating the outbreak of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and it is the 78th, and I think it's the 78th anniversary. The uprising was in 1943, and I'm wearing a yellow daffodil, which is Pauline Museum's way of commemorating the uprising because it represents, or it takes inspiration from Marek Edelman, one of the leaders of the uprising who stayed in Poland. And each year he would receive from an anonymous person a bouquet of yellow daffodils, and he would lay them at the base of the monument. And so each year we have what we call a daffodils campaign, and all of us, we wear this yellow daffodil as a way of commemorating the outbreak of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising.
Oh my goodness, Barbara, that was so moving. Really incredible. I'm so delighted you showed it. There are a few questions, and please put your questions in. There's a comment that Meyer's large scenes are reminiscent of Grandma Moses. Would he have been aware of her work?
Well, I think he probably, let me put it this way. I would say he probably knew, or he was probably aware of her in a very general sense, but not as not as an inspiration. I'll tell you what's amazing. That painting that I showed you of the Holocaust painting.
Yeah.
Let me tell you how that came about. My father was very eager to go to Spain and to retrace somehow or other the history of Spanish Jews, before the Inquisition. You can imagine that, and there's much to see, believe it or not. We had a wonderful trip. Anyway, we were in Madrid, and of course we went to the Prado. And my father and my husband, we all went up to the second level to the Goya, room of Goya's, and especially the room that has in it a very, very famous painting from the early 1800s, the Napoleonic War. It's called, I think, Disasters of War. And in it, you see a lineup of soldiers, of men, and you see them being shot. And my father and my husband stood there for, I don't know, half an hour. I don't know how long they stood there. And after they stood there, my father said, now I know how to paint what happened to my family. So it wasn't Grandma Moses, it was Goya.
Goya, amazing. That's fantastic. Eddie Rice wants to share about his mother. Are you there, Eddie? Do you want to unmute and tell Barbara, his mother, Esther?
Hang on. It's my mother-in-law, but it's Harriet here. It's her mother.
Yeah, it's my mother. She was very good friends with your father. They used to go to Earl Bale's Park to the concerts together. I have his book. We have a painting of his of the Simchas Torah. And he was really a very special man. And we miss him.
I remember seeing his exhibit at the Harborfront Gallery.
Yes. And he showed at the Koffler Gallery, Harborfront. He had he was quite an enterprising guy. He had another career.
Yeah. Betty, I think you also have memories of Barbara's father. Are you there?
I have wonderful memories of his father. And in fact, he had an exhibition in California. You remember that, Barbara?
Yes, it was at the Magnus Museum.
Right.
In Berkeley.
And I was there because I happen to have children in California. So Pinky told me about it. And I was there as soon as I heard about it.
Oh, wonderful, Betty. Lovely to see you.
You too. My regards to Max as well. I went to his exhibition in Auckland.
I know. You're a culture vulture.
Stephen says there's a good but old-fashioned ethnographic museum in Krakow with a small collection of folk art. Would any of those have been by Meyer? Thanks, Betty.
No, actually, there's an ethnographic museum in Kazimierz in Krakow, and there's another one also in Warsaw. But none of Meyer's work is there. However, my family has agreed to gift Meyer's work to Polin Museum of the History of Polish Jews in Warsaw.
Oh, that's
So that will be
wonderful.
its home.
That is really a very moving thing to know. Will there be any left in Toronto on display anywhere?
Yes, because there is work that will stay with the family as well, of course.
Great. Barbara, tell me, did you go around Poland looking for any of these other communities that your father would have visited?
Yes, I did actually. Oh my
Oh,
gosh,
Sylvia, what picture is that? You have to unmute and tell us.
Sylvia, unmute.
Sylvia, unmute. No?
She's going to do it.
Okay,
Okay.
there we go.
Tell
This
us what
is
we're
a
seeing.
picture. You see the three brothers that survived in the background, my mother and father, Joe and Jean, and then your grandparents, Avner and Rivka. In front are the four brothers.
Hmm.
At the bottom is my brother sitting in the middle, cousin Jerry, and me.
Wow.
Wow, beautiful.
That's beautiful. Can you take a copy of that and we'll send it on? Or that's
I
fantastic.
can, I mean, right now I can't, but
Yeah.
because I'm not that adept at all this stuff.
That
Yeah.
is truly amazing. Thank
But yes,
you.
but Sue, in answer to your question, yes, I did visit Ostrowiec, Kielce, Stash, I think Stashev, I can't remember, but Klimentov for sure. Then other places that Ilja, we did go to Drilj, Lublin, Sandomierz. So a number of towns and cities, really, they're even bigger than towns in the region.
Barbara, I remember
Barbara,
one
do you want,
thing.
sorry, just a second. Would you mind, Sylvia? Barbara, are you there? Do you want to share your story?
I would like to talk to you. My name is Celia Ores. I'm with
Sorry.
Charles.
Is
Oh,
Barbara
Celia,
helping?
yes, Celia.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Can we have Barbara's story first? Just one moment, in order. Barbara Held, do you want to tell us? Because we've all got so many wonderful stories. Go ahead, Barbara.
Well, and many years ago, when I was in charge of the children's programs at the Jewish Book Fair, your father brought some of his paintings and showed them to a group of the school children that came along. And they were so fascinated by his stories and by the paintings, they just couldn't stop asking him questions. It was one of the best programs we've had. It was a
Oh,
small
that's
group.
lovely. Thank you.
They
That's
were
just
fascinating.
lovely.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much.
That was lovely. Thank you, Barbara. Sylvia, go ahead. I interrupted you. But
Oh, that's okay. I remember a story when Meyer went back to Apatov and he went to their old house. And when he came to the door and identified himself, the people inside became very frightened and said, no, we don't know anything. We bought this, it's fine. And when you showed the pictures up Apatov, I brought my father. And I said, Daddy, look, it's Apatov. Aren't you excited? This is your house. He said, I know what it looks like. Is it mine? Did anybody survive? I don't need to look at it. I know. That
Well,
was
actually, there's, I would say there's two different issues. One is that the place where we knocked on the door was actually in Drilj. Not in Apatov.
Sorry, my father was from Drilj, of course.
Exactly. So it was exactly. So we knocked on the door it was in Drilj, and the house itself was set into a mountain.
Yeah.
It's a very, and they have wonderful paintings of Passover there, because my father remembers going to Drilj for Passover, and he also remembers going there to plant potatoes and harvest potatoes. He's got some lovely paintings. He's got some lovely paintings just of that and some stories of that. And the thing is that I have to say that the issue of what's called post-Jewish property in Poland is a very, very difficult issue. And you can imagine if you've got people who are in their 60s or 70s that have been living for the last 50 years in a place, and they have like nowhere else to go, and the prospect of being evicted and being out on the street, even though whether they have it legally, not legally, they paid for it, whatever the circumstances, it's a very, very difficult situation. So it's not like, oh, welcome, I'm packing my bags and leaving, move in. It's very hard for us to imagine the anxiety that that
Celia,
you
open
know,
the door,
that they must have felt.
right?
And
Okay.
we weren't there. We were not. We had zero interest whatsoever in trying to, not on our behalf, but on the family's behalf, of trying to reclaim the property. That was not our interest at all. I mean, I think my father just was just curious to see inside. But nonetheless, I think also I have to tell you that when I went to Poland for the first time in 1981, I wanted my father to come with me, and he wouldn't. He said, "No way, they can all go to hell."
Yeah.
You know, and
My
then
father's
7 or 8
feeling
years later, he
exactly.
changed his mind and he came with me. But then he was so anxious that he didn't want to spend more than 15 minutes in his town. It was a complete fiasco. And then in 1995, we went back again, and this time I was teaching for 6 weeks, and I brought my parents with me. And this time it really clicked. And then from then on, do you know that they've just this year, again, after 10 years, they tried 10 years ago to nominate my father to be an honorary citizen of Apatov,
Wow.
you know? So,
Got it.
and actually, when I told him that, he said, "What do you mean honorary citizen? I'm already a citizen." I said, "Well, it's something extra."
Your
Just a
grandmother,
second, Sylvia, sorry, it's not a, you got a nice comment from Elaine to say thank you for her. Elaine Hoffman, are you there? Do you want to unmute? She's talking about how your stories really enabled her father to open up about his life in Poland, because he lived a few miles away in a small town called Lagów. And only
Lagów, yeah.
Lagów.
Yeah, my sister and I are both actually on this call,
Okay.
and he would never talk about his life in Poland. He hated Poland. But when your book came out and we showed it to him, he just broke down crying. It was so moving to him and so close to how he had lived.
Hi, Elaine. It's
Hi.
your sister,
Hi.
Hi, Marcia,
Barbara.
wherever you are.
Well, thank you very much for telling me that. I think that my father would have been very gratified. He would have been
Thank
so
you.
gratified.
It really touched our father. He just, yeah, broke right down in tears seeing what he remembered as well from the old country.
We were just talking about how he would never talk about it up until really that point.
This is my son speaking.
Hi, Mark. Oh,
Hi.
I don't know, we don't have video on for some
It's
reason.
okay, Mark.
So anyway,
There was Celia on who just wanted to make a comment before. That was very moving, Elaine. Is Celia still there?
Yeah, Celia.
Yeah, I am.
Do you want to go ahead?
Well, I'm the mother of Michelle, and I have a painting of your father here in the house, and so does Michelle. And I have a book about your father that I have read very carefully. And today was another day to remember this, because it was the day of the Warsaw Ghetto.
Yes.
And in New York, there's a place for it. And there were lots of people there, several people today. And I was there, and we talked about the Warsaw Ghetto and the past. And the history of your father, I know quite well because I read the book, and I have a painting in my house that was his.
Wonderful. I'm
That
so
is
pleased,
wonderful.
Celia. I'm so pleased that that you have the painting and that you're living with it. Actually, I think it's a lithograph, and it's
Yeah.
beautiful. It's really, really beautiful.
Yeah.
That is
Wonderful.
just wonderful. I apologize that we're going to have to bring it to an end. I think we could all go on sharing our stories for a lot longer. And I know many of you will have the opportunity offline to continue the conversation with Barbara. I want to thank everybody so much. I'm so moved by what you shared with us today.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure.